thank you for having me, General Sameh Sadat and the whole AUF team. I think just to start that your group is honoring Afghan women on International Women's Day is a reflection of the generations that grew up under the Republic, that honor women's rights, that honor women's progress and women's history. Excuse me. I'm a feminist historian. I'm an academic, so I will talk a little bit more about those areas, very well connected to Minister Azimi's comments and Dr. Kavir's comments. I'm honored to be on this panel, so thank you for having me. If you allow, I would like to share my screen in a minute. My research has been focused on, and my upcoming book is on documenting women's resistance in Afghanistan in different periods, periodizing them so that we can use them in university systems all over the world to teach gender studies and feminist studies, teach them about Afghan women over the course of history. So that's been my goal. I was born in Afghanistan. I was raised in the US, and currently I teach at Stanford University. I'm the associate director of the program in feminist gender and sexuality studies. I'm also an oral historian at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. So my work is deeply engaged in Afghanistan, and I spent over 15 years during the time of the Republic documenting, studying, filming Afghanistan as a journalist, as a researcher, and as an academic. So I will share my screen with you. Okay, so I'll try to move through fast about these with these things. My screen only allows me to see my slides, so if you want to get my attention, please talk into the mic so that I can hear you. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Afghan women's activism predates many feminist movements in the West and has at times paralleled feminist advancements in European and Asian empires. Women in Afghanistan have challenged patriarchy, engaged in political resistance, and played a crucial role in governance and reform throughout different periods of history. One of the key takeaways from today's discussion that I hope you will have is that Afghan women have never been passive observers in history. Rather, they have shaped it. It's just that our history has never documented women's movements, individual women, and their contributions. They have always been on the margins of history. I center Afghan women in the history as where they should be. Afghanistan is unique in that it engaged with all three of the major empires of the 20th and 21st centuries. The British, Soviet, and American empires defined themselves in Afghanistan through the rhetoric of liberation and modernization. Each imperial formation enacted its own gendered projects, as we saw during the Republic, which created the conditions in which Afghanistan's leaders and women operated. So some of these, Minister Azimi, some of these amazing women, Minister Azimi also mentioned, and it is important to mention that these figures, these historical figures, still resonate today and during the time of the Republic in the imaginations of all Afghans, especially women and girls. Rabia Balkhi was a 10th century poet, possibly a saint, and possibly killed because she was a saint. That part of history has been removed, and I look at that in my research. Zarhuna Anno, who's the mother of Ahmad Shah Durrani, she played a crucial role in shaping Afghanistan's early women's movements. While less visible than some of the other queens, she worked behind the scenes to promote female education and political participation. There's quite a bit of anecdotal evidence that she guided Ahmad Shah Durrani in his early years as the king of that time in Afghanistan. So important to think of her as an advisory role, not technically, but informally. And then we have the image of Malalai of Maiwand, who was brought up at the time when, in 2021, when the Republic was fighting against Taliban takeover. Her images surfaced many, many times on social media to evoke this courage within the Afghan forces. She was a war heroine. We're not sure if she actually exists in real life, but she is an amalgamation of many, many women who engaged in very different ways in the wars in Afghanistan. And then I study active queens of the 19th and 20th century. We have Bibi Halima, the lead wife of Abdurrahman Khan. We've got Ulia Azrat, the lead wife of Habibullah Khan, mother of Amanullah Khan. And then we have Queen Soraya, daughter of Mahmud Tarzi and wife of Amanullah Khan. These were privileged women, but they were women who used their privilege to advance women's issues within the court, the royal courts. Queen Soraya being very publicly active, but Ulia Azrat, which I've done a lot of archival work on, actually was an incredible political figure of that time. Yes, informally and on the margins. So I periodize feminist periods in Afghanistan. And the first one that I call a feminist period is the 1920s, led by Queen Soraya and King Amanullah Khan, where they bring reforms and modernize. We know that many of us know the histories, but many outside of the Afghan community don't know how progressive she was, which was also the backlash. But she was an incredibly outspoken person who actually wrote a lot of articles and letters to the ulama at the time, very articulate in pushing back on some of their positions on women's education and women's veiling. So here she is in the Illustrated London Times in February 1928, where she accompanied the king on a European tour. This was very controversial. And in Afghan history, the controversy has been written a lot more than about the effects of this. It was the first time the world had seen a queen of Afghanistan and dressed in this modern, but still moderate way was impressive. These are photos that were published of her. And then I will jump forward just not to take a lot of time. And there's a lot of time that goes between the feminist period that Amanullah Khan and Queen Soraya were in, and then later in the 1960s. There was a regression in women's rights because there was the Nader Shah period, which shut down a lot of the Amanullah reforms. But the second period that I recognize is during the 1960s and 70s, led by Dr. Anahita Ratabzad. I spoke extensively to her daughter, and really worked through some of her archive, and other women who were part of the Afghan communist regime. Now, the communist regime was obviously very controversial because not everybody wanted to recognize the women of that period. And my work is not political. I really look at history and how women shaped these histories. And it's undeniable that Dr. Ratabzad and others really saw the advancement of women through the communist socialist regime. So just something to think about. And then another period, I think about the 1970s and early 1980s. This is the third period. And it's radical women's groups such as Rawa, which again is very controversial, but also incredible revolutionaries, like one of the most amazing women I know in Afghanistan, Tajwar Kakat, who was a mujahid in her own way. And I met with her and I interviewed her for the documentary that I worked on. So two women, very different politically, but representative of the strength and the resistance of that period for Afghan women. And then I will get to, there's a lot of periods in between these periodization that I do. The fourth period is the post 9/11 period during the American-led time of the Republic in Afghanistan. Most of this history is lived through all of us, and I'm trying to document it. From 2001 until 2021, the United States pursued the largest and most expensive gender project in history, which had its effects in Afghanistan. And we see these through these amazing leaders, Governor Habib Rabiu, who I adore, and Dr. Masouda Jalal, just two examples of many, many women during the time of the Republic. So today we know where we're at, all of us know, and women in Afghanistan are fighting the most severe feminist crisis in the world right now. 70 to 80 edicts passed by the Taliban And we know where we stand with this, with lack of education. Women are erased from public life. And unfortunately, now we move forward into the fifth period, a feminist period in Afghanistan, starting the way that I've periodized it, August 15th, with the fall of the US-backed Afghan government and the takeover of the country by the Taliban regime. A fifth feminist period started in Afghanistan. And their slogan has been non kar azadi, bread, work, freedom. I will turn this off and stop sharing. So I hope that this helps. This is what sustains our history throughout the world, is documenting it and preserving it. And I take this lecture in very longer form to other universities around the country, and I share them because I want Afghan women's history to be integrated into gender history studies all over. I'll be at George Washington University in about 2 weeks giving a lecture, and it's some of the work that I do to preserve really the fascinating history of Afghan women. I thank you for letting me speak to you today on International Women's Day. And I think that Afghan women in Afghanistan are some of the most resilient and compassionate. Thank you very much.